I'd like to take you back to 1956. Israel was 8 years old. And a man who would prove to be the leading modern Orthodox Jewish scholar of the second half of the 20th century, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, gave a series of lectures that got turned into a little booklet entitled Kol Nidre. It is a quote from Song of Songs, from one of the books of the Bible, and it means, "Listen, my beloved knocks." In the book, what happens is that the man knocks and the woman takes a while to get to the door, and by the time she opens the door, the man is gone. But in Jewish tradition, the story is not really about the love between a man and a woman. It's a story about a love between God and Israel. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik says, actually, God knocked and humanity responded. And there were, he says, 6 knocks, 6 responses, 6 miracles that created the state of Israel. The first one was a political miracle, that all the nations of the world came together and voted that there should be an Israel, he said. That was in response only to the knock of God. And he writes in this book in 1956 something that I bet he could write were he still alive today, which is, "It appears to me one cannot point to any other concrete accomplishment on the part of the United Nations." The second miracle, he said, was in the battlefield, that this small Jewish army overcame the combined Arab armies of the nations around it. The third was theological, because we may not remember anymore, but at the time he wrote it, people were amazed because the Christian world had said, until the founding of the State of Israel, that all the promises that were made to the Jews, that they would return to Israel, those were all actually canceled once they rejected the Christian idea of God, and now they were all transferred to the church. And all the promises were actually for Christianity. And when the Jews returned to Israel, the Christian world said, no, the promises still hold for the Jews. The fourth knock, says Soloveitchik, was that the heart of the youth was awakened, that all over the world, young people went to Israel, and in Israel, they built the land. They went to Israel, livnotu lehibanot ba, to build and be built by the land. The fifth, he said, was perhaps the most important. And I will quote him, "The astounding discovery that Jewish blood is not cheap." Because until that moment, remember this is 1956, everybody who had survived the Shoah was telling the people around them that Jewish blood is cheap. You can do whatever you want. And then Israel proved that it was not true. And lastly, that God enabled us to have a place where any Jew could find refuge. Those are the 6 knocks. This summer, I was sitting at a writers' conference in Jerusalem. And my friend, the writer and translator Evan Fallenberg, said to me, "You know, I have a lot of friends whose children are serving in Gaza and some in the north. And all of them have a sign on their door. And the sign says, 'Do not knock.'" And he told me that story because one day there was a knock at his door, and he said, "The first thing I did was not look at the door, I looked at the window. Because my son is serving from Gaza, and if that knock meant what I thought it did, I was going to jump out the window." Thank God, in that case it didn't. But all the people who are serving know what it means when someone knocks at your door. And so you can text them, you can call them, you can tell them you're coming over, but you may not knock. And I thought about the difference between that, the seventh knock, and the first six. First, one is from God and another from human beings. One is a knock of triumph and one of tragedy, but most important and most dramatic to me is that one is about history and one is personal. And I say that because for all the years that I spoke on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I always followed the formula that my father followed, which is on Rosh Hashanah, you speak about the Jewish people and about Israel, and on Yom Kippur, you speak personally. You speak about people's souls. But you see, this year, they're the same thing. This year, the fate of our people is the fate of our souls. In this book, Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about two kinds of covenants that the Jewish people have, Brit HaYehud and Brit HaGoral, the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny. The covenant of fate, he says, is what has happened to us, is who we are, and you cannot escape that covenant. Against your will, without your will, you're a Jew. And the world will never let you forget that truth. I know that one of the places that I saw it was on the faces of the protesters at Harvard. When I looked at them, I saw the covenant of fate, who I was. Now, for those of you who've asked, because many of you have asked me, I was there on a one-year fellowship, and I am done with Harvard. I knew that being done with Harvard would be the applause line in this sermon. But that was the covenant of fate. Even the Jewish students who were trying to hide when they walked by those encampments, they felt it inside of themselves. They could not escape the reality that they were Jews. But the covenant of destiny is different. I saw it in this congregation on Rosh Hashanah, when the young man who had survived the Nova Festival was here and talked to the congregation, and I saw the love in your faces. That's the covenant of destiny. This year, the two are the one. History is what we will do with what we have been given. And the abstract becomes concrete. The one other thing that I did at Harvard that was separate from all the other stuff was I took a course in Milton. In the poet, I read Paradise Lost, which I never, ever would have read had I not taken the course. So I took the course so I would read the poem. But I knew Milton's famous sonnet about his blindness, which ends with the stunning line that I have always loved, "They also serve who only stand and wait." Always loved that line. They also serve who only stand and wait. And then I read about the story in Kibbutz Nachal Oz of Shlomo Ron. The grandfather who, when he saw the terrorists were coming, rushed all of his family into the Memad, into the safe room, and closed the door, and then went back himself and sat in the living room so that they would see him and kill him and think he was the only one home and save his family. And that 85-year-old grandfather who did not have a gun, who lived in Nachal Oz because he was a peacenik and believed in peace, he saved his family. And when I read that story, I immediately thought, they also serve who only stand and wait. And that's what he did. And the family said all day long they heard terrorists enter the house, see him dead in the chair, and leave. He saved them in life, and he saved them in death. It seems general, but it's personal. It seems about the world, but it's also about your soul. When I was in Israel, I went to the archaeological campus where they are gathering all of the great archaeological finds of Israel to put them in one place. And in the basement, because it goes down layers and layers and layers, they took me down and they showed me the only intact Roman swords in the world, fully intact. They have the leather casing and the leather handle and the blade. And the reason those swords are intact is that they were stolen by Jewish rebels and brought to the Judean desert. And obviously they had hoped one day that they would return and use them, but they never got to return. And so the desert, sort of in fidelity to the people who stole them, kept them preserved forever. And soon you will be able to see them. And that same day, after I was done at the archaeological campus, I took a helicopter. I got into the helicopter, and the pilot's name was Speedy. That's what he told me. His last name is Spivak. He said, but everybody calls me Speedy. And I said, well, Speedy, this is like only the second time in my life I've been in a helicopter. He goes, my God, me too. And then he took me up the Mediterranean coast. And it was like seeing all of Jewish history in one ride. You saw the Roman ruins at Caesarea, and you saw the Crusader castles at Akko, and then we go over the hills of the ultra-modern city of Haifa, and we landed at the Technion. And there I met with students. And there was a student who wants to help launch rockets into space, and there's a student who wants to find a cure for breast cancer, and there's a student who wants to build bridges in a different and new way, but all of them, these students, some born in America, most born in Israel, all of them have lost 100 days, 120 days out of their semester because they have gone to fight in Gaza. One of them grew up in the kibbutz and hid with his family and just managed to survive. Another one lost his best friend fighting beside him. And I thought, there is no distance at all between the rebels who stole the swords because they wanted to defend their land and these students who are the same age as the rebels were 2,000 years ago. And they were standing right in front of me. This year, there is no distance between our history and your soul. We are them, and they are us. It's our fight as well. And the words of the psalmist remain true in a different way about the guardian of Israel, Lo Yanum v'lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael, that the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, but the guardian of Israel is both divine and human. Both hands knock at the door. The people of Israel, we say all the time, arevim ze bazeh, are responsible for one another, but it's more than that. We are entwined with one another. We don't have the luxury of indifference. We don't have the option of silence. We will not cower or hide, since this is our fate. We will not avoid our destiny. You know, the Midrash, the rabbis say that there was an earlier knock. God knocked at the door of all the nations and offered them the Torah, and they all said no. And I must admit that this year, for the first time, I thought maybe the nations had a point. Maybe that wasn't such a bad answer. But we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We said, we will do and we will listen. So we are bound by fate. That same Rabbi Soloveitchik points out that in the Bible, angels are called malachim. And malach means messenger, and sometimes the same word, malach, is used for human beings. So what is the difference between a human malach and an angel malach? He says, because a human malach can choose not to fulfill the message. We are malachim. We are messengers. And we just have to decide whether we neglect or we fulfill the message we were given. God works in mysterious ways. I was more or less done with this sermon. And then I got an email today. The email was from Gerald Schroeder. Some of you may know that name. He was once a scholar here. Gerald Schroeder is a PhD in physics from MIT and teaches in Israel and writes books about Torah and science. And every now and then we write back and forth. And he happened to write me today and he said, I heard something wonderful that I wanted to tell you. He was near the Kotel, he said, and a woman said to him, you know Psalm 23, the most famous psalm, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Gam ki elech begates al mavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. And I remember when I learned that psalm, our teacher told us the most important word in the psalm is walk. You don't stay in the valley of the shadow of death. You keep moving. But he heard a different insight. She said to him, tell me, Professor, how is it that he said, that the poet says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. How does the poet know that God is with them? And she said, the answer is that you only have a shadow where there is sunlight. If it's all dark, there's no shadow. So when he walks and sees the shadow of the valley of death, he knows God is there. And I thought, that is exactly the message. We have seen so many shadows this year. But they haven't been total darkness. They have been shadows. We have not forgotten. We remember. We don't only have a covenant of fate. We have a covenant of destiny. It is a debt that we owe to those children who stand with the swords in their hands today and who stood with swords in their hands 2,000 years ago. Remember what I told you about the Song of Songs? That the knock came, and because she didn't open the door in time, he was gone. Well, my friends, the knock has come. I don't know about you, although I think I do. But I know what the Jewish world must say. Hineni. We are here. I am here. Each of us must open the door to the fate that we have shared together and the destiny that together, through all the shadows, we will create. Gmar Chatima Tova.
Turn to